easily imaginable in much of the former Soviet Union, but certainly not in the middle of downtown Moscow. The attack on the Russian parliament building began just after dawn. Boris Yeltsin true to his word when he promised to regain control of the city. By midday, the White House was completely surrounded by tanks and APCs. The gunfire of the heavily armed parliament defenders and return fire could be heard throughout the morning. The White House, after a brutal assault by tanks, in flames, along with the city building across the street. The violence was ratcheted up in Moscow when hardline demonstrators broke through the government lines Sunday at the parliament and started a rampage at the parliament and the television tower, which left at least 20 dead and 100 injured. Boris Yeltsin offered legislators one final chance to surrender late Sunday night, but they refused. There were reports Monday that Alexander Rutskoy and Ruslan Khasbulatov were ready to talk, but not surrender. There are no firm statistics yet on the dead and wounded in Monday's violence. On the streets around the battle zone Monday morning, pedestrians seemed stunned. It's so uncivilized, he said, embarrassing that a country as great as ours would have this happen in its capital. The scene, with tanks lining the streets leading to the White House, was strangely reminiscent of the August coup 2 years ago. But this time, few were begging the soldiers to stop, but rather urging them on. Most, although troubled by the violence, seemed unanimous in their support for the Russian leader. The deputies had no right to do what they did, she says. I think Yeltsin is even being too soft on them. The soldiers themselves said no question about whose side they're on, but they too wished it could have been otherwise. I'm worried about my men, said this senior lieutenant. I just wish we could have solved it peacefully. I think Russia is sick of these constant wars. We are told at this moment by the Reuters news agency that the defense minister, Mr. Grachev, is outside of the White House holding talks with some of the deputies who are interested in some sort of surrender. Now, at the moment, there is substantial support for Boris Yeltsin on the streets, and a lot of this violence may be able to be blamed on the parliament. But when the toll of all of this becomes clear, especially if there are as many as 500 dead inside, the Russian leader could find himself a much less popular man. Bob?
Claire, that reported figure of 500, as you note, has not been independently confirmed by Russian officials. But does it not seem, on the face of it, a little high to you?
It does indeed. I was very surprised to hear that figure because although the sounds have been dramatic and the gunfire has indeed been dramatic, the White House is really like a fortress, and it would be very hard for people to be injured unless they were right next to windows. And we were also told that the special forces that went inside to try to clear the White House out had orders not to hurt anybody unless they were being fired upon themselves. Again, we are just being told, Bob, that Grachev is at the White House. He has just arrived in front of the White House to hold talks.
Would it be your inference, Claire, that if he is negotiating with deputies from inside, that they are negotiating on behalf of all those inside?
That's hard to say. It would seem that they might be. There aren't that many deputies inside, and we've heard rumors over the morning that, in fact, Khasbulatov and Rutskoy both want to talk. They never wanted to use the word surrender, but they have continually said they're ready to talk. So it would seem that they know they're outnumbered, and it's really their only option at this point.
Claire, do you see the same picture, the armored personnel carrier that we're getting here? It looks like some ranking military men may be there. Can you tell us who that is?
Yes, I think that is the group with Pavel Grachev, and he is indeed among that group right now outside of the front of the White House, Bob.
Do you have any idea, Claire, what has brought them to this crux now, all of a sudden? And I'm thinking of the many disparate shades of political thought and bent that there are represented in the White House.
Well, I think that they realized simply that they really had no other option at this point but to negotiate. They're completely outgunned. The Army has made it clear to us on the streets that they absolutely support Yeltsin, although Rutskoy had said all along he thought he had some support in the Army and that the Army would never fire on its own people. We've seen that that's not true. I think they just felt that this is the only way out if they are in fact negotiating now.
I know you've had your hands full there this morning, overnight, and yesterday as well, but have you been able to talk with any of the pro-Parliament demonstrators who have rushed the building today? I'm wondering what their thinking was.
We have talked to a few of them. We talked to some of them who were coming out the other way. The few that we talked to are very angry. They were very hostile. One of them threatened to knock our camera over and break it. So a lot of the people around there are not in a very rational state. They're either extreme right-wing in fascist groups here or extreme left-wing communists. They're not the ordinary Muscovites.
Claire Shipman in Moscow. It is now nearly 9 minutes past the hour. Troop and armor reinforcements entered Moscow early this morning following fierce fighting at the Ostankino Television Center yesterday. Troops and tanks surrounded the Parliament building, some soldiers going in and some tanks opening fire.
Whoa. Did you see that? Tank has opened fire on the front of the White House. A T-72 tank has fired twice.
Tank shells blasted holes in the side of the White House, and they were answered by automatic weapons fire from inside. No sign of any of the military units in the city supporting the dissident lawmakers. Helicopters buzzed over the White House. Armored personnel carriers disgorged troops, including some elite black berets, some paratroopers as well. Troops loyal to Boris Yeltsin worked their way through the corridors on the lower floors of the huge building. Some men carrying white flags left the Parliament building, as we have noted a short while ago, and joined a crowd of legislative supporters outside. And as we have noted, Reuters News Service is quoting a military aide to Boris Yeltsin as saying there are an estimated 500 dead bodies in the White House. Official confirmation of that is yet to come. President Yeltsin launched today's commando and tank assault on the Parliament building attack after a television address in which he accused his hardline opponents of attempting a weekend coup.
This armed rebellion is doomed. To restore peace, law and order, and calm troops are being pulled in Moscow. Their objective is to liberate the premises that have been seized by the criminal elements, to disarm the illegal armed formations and neutralize them. I'm asking you, distinguished Muscovites, to give your moral support to the Russian officers and soldiers.
Our coverage of events in Moscow and other news continues after this.
Hey, I'll try Sunny D.
Some good stuff.
Hey, 2 kinds of Sunny D.
Some kids love the rich, tangy taste of original Sunny Delight, but other kids prefer California style with its lighter texture and smoother orange taste.
I'll take original. Make mine California. Hey, wait up.
Sunny Delight, original Florida citrus punch and lighter texture California style.
There are lots of reasons to buy life insurance. Here are 2 great ones. I'm State Farm Agent Mike Foy. As the Goff family has grown, so have their life insurance needs. That's why we get together for family insurance checkups. I make sure to explain all the options, then they decide on the plan that's right for them. Ask your State Farm agent for a family insurance checkup. It's a great way to learn about life.
Save right now. Buy 3 Goodyear tires at the regular price, get the 4th tire free. That's right. Buy any 3 of these Goodyear tires at the regular price and get the 4th free. 4 for 3 now. Hurry, savings end soon.
State finals coming up. A lot of pressure to win. I don't eat right, I get irregular, so I don't project a winning attitude, and the boys see that. I tried some natural bulk fiber, but I couldn't take all that grit. Then I discovered smooth texture Metamucil. No grit in the mix or the taste. Easy to get the extra fiber I need every day to stay regular. You got a winning attitude, you win, if you're lucky.
Smooth texture Metamucil, the natural choice for regularity.
Sam is going to show you why my Dirt Devil stick vac is so special. That's right, it digs dirt out of tough places with its unique triangular head. It's a Dirt Devil exclusive. Like us. Get the new Dirt Devil stick vac.
Continuing to put into perspective what is going on and has gone on in Moscow, there was a pitched battle yesterday for control of Russia's main television center. Here's what that looked like. That gunfire was very real. People were shot and killed and wounded. For a while, control of the building was divided and the station went off the air. The fighting around the heart of Moscow has taken a heavy toll on all sides, and ambulances and hospitals have been scrambling to keep up with the injured. The flashpoint of Russia's political crisis came at midday on Sunday, when thousands of anti-Yeltsin demonstrators clashed with government troops. For several hours Sunday, it appeared the anti-Yeltsin forces had the upper hand. Opposition leader Alexander Rutskoy called on his supporters to storm the television station and take over the mayor's office. At one point, Rutskoy's supporter marched through the crowd with a handful of keys apparently taken during a raid on the mayor's office. But at sunset Sunday, after declaring a state of emergency, Yeltsin began mustering his forces for today's assault. President Clinton says he is getting hourly updates on the situation in Moscow. The president spent the night in San Francisco, and CNN correspondent Jill Doherty is traveling with him. She joins us now with an update. Jill.
Well, Bob, in spite of the violence in Moscow, President Clinton has decided to stick with his originally scheduled 3-day trip to California to promote his health care plan and defense conversion. At the present time, as you said, he is in San Francisco, and he has been getting regular updates from his national security staff, both here and back in Washington. While in California, he's spoken out several times in support of President Boris Yeltsin. Last night in Sacramento at a town hall meeting, televised town hall meeting on domestic issues, President Clinton predicted Yeltsin would win the confrontation with his opponents.
President Yeltsin has bent over backwards not to have the soldiers fire on anybody, not to promote any violence. And he may be thinking today he went too far in that because they basically got up ahead of steam and the situation got out of control. I believe that he will be successful in the end because the people support him. And I think the United States should support Yeltsin as long as he is the person who embodies a commitment to democracy and to letting the Russian people chart their own course. And he does. The people who have started this opposition are people who represent the old communist system that Russia is trying so hard to move away from.
The Clinton administration has moved from general statements of support for Boris Yeltsin to tacitly giving the Russian leader the green light to use force if necessary to settle the situation. And one senior administration official said that the U.S. had felt all along that President Yeltsin would and should do what is necessary to avoid widespread violence. I'm Jill Doherty, CNN, reporting live from San Francisco.
Jill, the last we heard, Mr. Clinton had not talked with Mr. Yeltsin. Has that changed?
That has not changed. We have to bear in mind that it is still very early here in San Francisco, but as of the last time we heard, he had not yet spoken with him.
Jill Doherty in San Francisco. Many other world leaders are also backing Boris Yeltsin, although some were concerned the shooting in Moscow could lead to a wider conflict. Russia's giant neighbor to the south, China, said it was deeply concerned and hoped for an early end of the conflict. A short time ago, the European community issued a statement supporting Yeltsin while deploring the loss of life. It said the rebels bore much of the responsibility. It was 9:46 in the morning today, Moscow time, when the first tank fire was aimed at the Russian White House. Here's how that played out.
Almost like an elevator shaft.
Did you see that? Tank has opened fire on the front of the White House. A T-72 tank has fired twice into the front of the White House. The tank is on the bridge at Kutuzovsky Prospect.
thing that they...
That was from a tank.
Yet another shot from the cannon of a T-72 tank into the front of the Russian White House. Eileen and I are now crouching on our roof here because we can see return fire coming out of the White House.
You can see heavy damage from that.
T-80?
It may have been a T-80 tank that hit that front of the White House. You can see some heavy damage to the windows up there. Those are offices of the deputies. They are offices of some of the staff of the White House. Many of the staff of the White House had left, but many of them had remained. Most of the staff were women. They had been serving upstairs in the buffet in the cafeteria, and that was at the top floor of the White House.
You can still hear small arms fire from around back of the White House. Bruce Conover is on the camera over there showing us those pictures. Up here on the roof with us, Paul Dietrich, taking pictures of the tanks. Steve Harrigan, we have two cameras.
There are more tanks now coming down Kutuzovsky Prospect.
More tanks are coming down Kutuzovsky Prospect, Jonathan.
Well, maybe we can get a camera to show us them while we're looking around. We have tape of that first blast on the building. We can have a look at it now. This is not tape. This is a live picture of tanks or armored vehicles advancing very, very quickly to the building.
They're approaching the other side of the river from the building.
While this is going on the street from the inside of the building, it says that Alexander Rutskoy would like negotiations with Yeltsin. Now, the Reuters news agency reporting that apparently the fire so far may have been enough to change a few minds inside that building. Rutskoy, the vice president, a former Yeltsin ally who Yeltsin fired, and who finds himself with the hardline lawmakers inside that building, up till now unwilling to negotiate, now prepared to negotiate.
I suspect that we won't see Boris Yeltsin in a mood to negotiate at this point until we see Alexander Rutskoy walk out of that building with his hands on his head.
You're watching as a battle unfolds in the streets of Moscow for the Russian parliament. A handful of hardline lawmakers, perhaps 100 or 200, with their supporters well armed inside that building, until now holding out against President Boris Yeltsin, but at last report willing to negotiate with him to try and defuse this crisis.
These are black berets on top of these tanks that are going down Kutuzovsky Prospect. They're waving aside photographers and press.
Okay, Jonathan,
Here comes
3 helicopters high in the sky over the Russian White House. Paul Dietrich's camera showing you 3 helicopters high in the sky over the Russian White House. They appear almost to be ready to hover at this point.
Mr. Yeltsin had said this earlier this morning that he wanted negotiations again, but that the defenders of the White House and Mr. Rutskoy had to lay down their arms. If Mr. Rutskoy does want negotiations now, that will be a precondition. They must come out and lay down their arms.
If these helicopters are carrying paratroopers, I would expect that we would see them piling out before long. The helicopters are far enough to the west of the White House now that the prevailing wind out of the west would carry descending troops about to the building. We don't know if that's going to happen, speculation at this point. But certainly they're in a place right now where if men jumped, the wind would carry them in the direction of the White House. They're about, I guess, a half mile now west of the White House, high in the sky. Small arms fire continues around the White House. We watch these 3 helicopters.
If men do emerge from those helicopters, they face, as Eileen told us earlier, the possibility, at least, of sniper fire from the roof of the White House.
That's absolutely correct, Jonathan. There were many men up there, about a dozen every night, sometimes less, depending on how cold it was and how they thought things were going. Those helicopters are right literally above our heads right now. We can't get them right now from our camera position because they are right above our heads.
As we listen to those helicopters overhead, these motorized howitzers carrying Black Beret troops are on the move again, moving across the bridge on Kutuzovsky Prospect. They are headed directly for a line of water tank trucks that are used to wash Moscow streets. You see fleeing in front of them some bystanders who had been gawking from the bridge there watching this activity. They've gone by those two T-80 tanks, which have opened fire from the front of the White House building.
That 9:52 a.m. Moscow time, we remind you, translates to about 2:52 a.m. in New York, Washington, or Atlanta. Our coverage of events in Moscow and elsewhere continues after this.
Nokia. It remembers because it's human to forget. Nokia. Connecting people.
Today, a lot of credit cards charge you fat interest rates. Discover Card has changed all that. With Smart Rate, the more you use your Discover Card for purchases, the lower your interest rate can be. Now as low as 14.9%, plus cashback bonus and no annual fee. Discover Card. The only thing we're heavy on is value. It pays to Discover, the card that pays you back.
We're using high-resolution robotic cameras in order to give you a closer look at the fit and finish of our Lincoln cars. To achieve this kind of quality, we not only employ technologically advanced machines, we also employ dedicated people who bring to Lincoln a craftsmanship that can't be duplicated by a mere machine. Sorry, fellas. Lincoln, what a luxury car should be.
To be a Blue Ribbon champion, you've got to get up pretty early. And helping Jan get a jump on her day is decaffeinated Folgers Crystals with that great waking up aroma. Aroma that starts with mountain-grown beans, fresh brewed, then crystallized. Coffee darker than the other leading decaffeinated. Darkness that signals all the eye-opening aroma and rich taste to come. Decaffeinated Folgers Crystals.
The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup.
There have been signs over the past half hour or so of a possible denouement to the crisis in Moscow. Let's go live to correspondent Claire Shipman, who's there. Claire.
Bob, well, we've had more word from Yeltsin's military advisor, Dmitry Volkogonov, again through the Reuters news agency. He said that altogether there have been about 700 military men involved in this, 10 tanks, some other APCs. He said that, in fact, when the special troops entered the White House, if the people inside immediately put their hands up and dropped their guns and surrendered, they were not hurt. But again, that figure is still being quoted of at least 500 inside dead. Volkogonov also said there can be no guarantees for those who started this bloodshed, and by that he probably means Mr. Rutskoy and Mr. Hasbulatov. And what you may be able to see now from one of our cameras are pictures outside of the White House. Troops are gathering among the demonstrators there. The demonstrators have been trying to push back and forth from the front of the White House. They seem to have pushed their way in. Again, they're not all demonstrators. Many of them have just come as onlookers trying to get in closer. The troops have not been able to keep them back. And as the gunfire goes off, as you hear the sniper fire, they've been rushing back one way or the other. There's no way to tell if people are being crushed or hurt in that crowd at all. What we're seeing now is a picture from the back of the White House, some tanks and APCs still there at the back of the White House, but again, no movement. It appears there may be some sort of negotiating underway. Bob?
Claire Shipman in Moscow, and we will continue our coverage with Most immediately, a business news update after this.
The National Organization for Women, ACLU. Senator Robert Dole.
In the eternal search for the truth, you're bound to raise some eyebrows, step on a few toes, butt heads.
The Young Republicans. The U.S. Congress.
So if we've inadvertently offended anyone along the way, Pat, Michael, and John would like to offer their most sincere apologies. Crossfire, weeknights on CNN, lively talk, healthy debate.
Michael Crawford brings you the power and passion of Andrew Lloyd Webber. Set your spirits soaring with one of the greatest voices of our time.
The dawn was breaking, the world was waking.
13 of Andrew Lloyd Webber's most memorable songs. Michael Crawford and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra.
Power of the music of the night.
Feel the power.
This is CNN.
Let us look now at how the financial markets are taking the events in Moscow and elsewhere. Stuart Varney's at the Business News Desk in New York. Stuart.
All right, Bob, let's start with stocks. They are mostly higher in Europe. Bloodshed in Russia, yes, but traders feel that President Boris Yeltsin will prevail. That is a plus for stocks. In London, the FT100 share index is up 15 points at 3,054. In Frankfurt, the DAX is up 12 points. In Paris, the CAC 40 down only slightly, down just a point. As for Wall Street, well, traders of U.S. stocks in London predict a steady opening for the Dow Industrials as the situation in Russia appears to stabilize in Mr. Yeltsin's favor. As for Treasury bonds, they're holding steady in London. Right now, the 30-year bond down 2/32, the yield 5.99%. The dollar only slightly higher now against Europe's currencies. As investors seek something of a safe haven, the dollar actually is down a bit against the Japanese yen. Oil prices a little higher as fears of disruption of oil production in Russia fade. Britain's North Sea crude oil is up 10 cents at $17.40 a barrel. Gold and silver prices leading to the plus side, but only just. Gold up 70 cents an ounce at $355.70. There is other news apart from Russia. There will be some stocks to watch when Wall Street opens today. Columbia Healthcare and the Hospital Corporation of America. Columbia plans to buy HCA for $5.7 billion in stock. The deal will create the biggest commercial healthcare provider in the world. That's the latest in financial news. We'll be back in an hour to see how Wall Street reacts to the events overseas. I'm Stuart Varney at the CNN Business News Desk in New York.
There is new fighting reported today in the capital of Somalia. And there are unconfirmed reports that at least one American soldier is being held hostage. All this follows a big assault yesterday in Mogadishu by UN forces against troops loyal to Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. CNN correspondent Jamie McIntyre joins us from the Pentagon with an update. Jamie.
Bob, it's not over, and the casualty toll could go higher. That's the word from the Pentagon this morning. The U.S. Army major serving as UN military spokesman in Mogadishu said as dawn broke there that the fighting continues as the UN pushes ahead with a major operation aimed at breaking the back of Mohammed Farah Aidid's political structure in South Mogadishu. So far, there are still only 5 confirmed deaths of U.S. troops, all believed to have been in one of 2 Army Black Hawk helicopters shot down yesterday. The second helicopter had to be surrounded by about 70 Army Rangers before wounded crew members could be evacuated in the middle of the night last night. This is the heaviest loss of American lives in a single day of fighting, and there are reports, as yet unconfirmed, that 1 U.S. soldier may have been taken prisoner and that the remains of an American serviceman were paraded around through the streets of Mogadishu. The attack began late yesterday on the ID'd stronghold in the Bakara market section, where the UN spokesman insists ID'd was not the target. 24 of his supporters were detained, including several described as key militia members. Somali casualties are said to be high, perhaps in the hundreds. One Red Cross report put the number at near 500. President Clinton expressed sorrow for the loss of American lives as he arrived in California yesterday for an electronic town meeting.
My deepest condolences go to the families and the friends of those brave young Americans.
Clinton called the overall mission a success, while at the same time his defense secretary is looking for ways to get U.S. combat troops home faster.
There's a lot of need for American forces in lots of parts of the world, and we would like not to stay in Somalia, and we certainly are not going to stay more than we're needed.
And even before the latest casualties, many in Congress were saying enough is enough.
What we have now is the ultimate worst case. We have reduced greatly our military power and expanded the mission.
I think we should get out of Somalia. I think we've accomplished our objective.
It is early afternoon now in Mogadishu, and it appears the fighting is still going on. While it seems the UN has inflicted heavy losses on ID'd's forces, it seems equally clear that by again eluding capture and killing American soldiers, the warlord has scored a psychological victory in his effort to weaken U.S. political support for what is now clearly a guerrilla war in Somalia. Bob?
Jamie, there are some highly emotionally charged elements to this latest incident, including the reported holding of one U.S. Troop or soldier hostage, the reported parading of the body of another on a wheelbarrow through the streets of the city. Does any of this argue for some sharper, dramatic action by the Pentagon?
Well, of course, this has been the danger all along, and right now the emphasis of the Pentagon, particularly the Clinton administration, is finding a way to quickly resolve the situation and get out of Mogadishu. President Clinton has been pushing Defense Secretary Aspen to find ways to lower the profile of American troops. Now, this would seem to go against that kind of strategy. And just speculating, one might look at this and say, well, sensing the political winds in Washington, that UN commanders on the ground in Mogadishu may have sensed that they may have just a limited time left if they really want to try to capture Aidid and isolate his political faction. So this might have been a last-ditch stab, but it's hard to tell at this point and this many miles away.
All right, thank you, Jamie. The U.S. Supreme Court opens its new term today. The justices will tackle 3 voting rights cases that could clarify the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and issue what it takes to ensure minorities have an equal voice at the polls. Illinois Republican Bob Michel reportedly will not seek a 20th term in Congress next year. The Peoria Journal-Star quotes unidentified staff members for the story and says Michel will announce his retirement plans later today. Michel's 70. He's been House Minority Leader since 1980. Firefighters in Southern California used entertainer Michael Jackson's property to help fight a huge wildfire. They entered his ranch yesterday and set back fires to block an advancing blaze in Los Padres National Forest. They were able to surround most of the 40,000-acre fire and finally declared the effort successful. Authorities say no buildings on Jackson's ranch were threatened. They expect the fire to be under control by Friday night. Opening statements are scheduled to begin today in the trial of 4 men accused of conspiring to bomb the World Trade Center. That February 26th explosion killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. The 4 men accused in the bombing are all Muslim fundamentalists. The trial's expected to last for several months. A Palestinian blew himself up in a suicide car bomb attack on an Israeli bus today. It happened near an Israeli military headquarters in the occupied West Bank. Army radio reports said the driver rammed the car packed with explosives into the bus. At least 23 people, mainly passengers, were reported injured. The driver was identified as a member of an Islamic group opposed to the Israeli PLO agreement signed last month in Washington. Tons of relief supplies are pouring into India today to help survivors of the earthquake 5 days ago. The town of Killarney was among the hardest hit by the quake. Today, as India's Prime Minister toured the town, Killarney residents broke through security lines and begged him to rebuild their homes. Throughout southwestern India, the focus has shifted to helping those who survived the quake. U.S. military transport planes have brought tons of water jugs, tents, and medicine into the area. In a late development, a 19-month-old girl was reportedly pulled from the rubble today in the town of Killarney. Well, when it comes to learning a new job, many people say hands-on experience is the best way to go. But what if you're training to be a dentist, and that hands-on experience involves making human guinea pigs out of patients? Jeff Flock tells us about an alternative approach in our medical report.
Drilling with no pain. No, it's not Novocaine.
We can bring the patient torso into a position where we can work.
It's a dummy. And as they say, you can learn a lot from a dummy.
Inside the patient's head, we have artificial teeth.
Dental training sure has come a long way.
We had no cheeks, we had no chest, we had no face, so we were really working on something that really didn't simulate a patient. It simulated the mouth, but not the patient.
Now, Northwestern University dental students are drilling and filling some of the nation's most sophisticated artificial patients.
The cheeks are pliable, just like on a real patient.
They are getting rave reviews.
You feel conscious about what you're doing. You're not just yanking. You really feel like maybe there's a nerve in there and you really want to be careful with it.
If you're working with the mannequins, actually the facial, the cheeks are there, so actually it's just like you're working with a patient.
The simulators are part of a new $3 million dental lab at Northwestern that is billed as beyond state-of-the-art.